It's high time for a new perspective. In a world of collective unease, we've got you covered this week with your hosts, Pastor Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland. Today on The Perspective, I don't think we've had a more prolific writer on the show who's covered as many topics and issues as our guest today, Michele Howe. Michelle's a reviewer for Publishers Weekly. She's written over 20 books and covers everything from single moms to homeschooling moms to expecting moms. Her specialty shines through her life's work on faith, friendship, love, loss, and letting go.
Hey, welcome to The Perspective today. I'm glad you're with us, and welcome back, Julie. I'm glad you're with us as well.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
You know, I love the backdrops that we can create.
I know.
And the
Such
team
variety.
always pulls them up. This is kind of an interesting one.
I think it's amazing. It's inspirational.
Yeah, okay. When you see a scene like that,
Yeah.
what's one of your most inspirational spots or moments as you think about it?
Oh, moments. Well, I was going to say Venice is the one place I'd like to go to. But as far as being moments, I've been in the mountains in Norway. And just when you're up that high and you're just looking out and everything seems so small, I just can't help but think there has to be a God who created all this beauty. What
Well, I
about
don't
you?
doubt the fact that there has to be a God, but I think I can top your experience.
Okay.
I like the mountains too. I like riding it on my motorcycle. Just beating down the road. It's pretty kind of like, born free. Like you're just going for it.
Wind in your hair.
Wind in your hair. And but our prolific author that we have today, I know the landscape somewhat where she lives. There's no mountains.
Nope.
Kind of like here, we got a few hills.
We have a few hills
in Ontario, but not the mountains. But anyways, all that aside, prolific writer, author, probably one of the most we've ever had on the program, who's written so many different articles and books, Michele Howe. And Michele, we're glad you're with us. And if you want to tell us that there's mountains in Michigan, we'll believe you, but you're going to have to go long and far on that one.
No, we don't have mountains, but we have many lakes, which is why it's called the Great Lakes State. Many, 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 many lakes. And we actually live on a farm, but we can see Lake Erie from our house. And when you're talking about mountains and splendor and, inspiration, I just walk down to the beach and just walk it. And again, you cannot not believe in God when you see the immenseness, of a huge lake and all that water and the power in the wind and everything that it brings in. So I get it. Yeah.
So true. So
okay.
true.
Well, we'll let you go. We'll give you a bye on that one. All right. How about that? But hey, let's just jump in. It's amazing what God has allowed you to accomplish. You're an author of more than 20 books, but you're also a reviewer. And that sounds almost kind of boring, but I don't think it is. Tell us what that is all about and how did it happen?
Well, I started writing 37 years ago when my first daughter was just about a year old. And that's how I got into publishing, was writing book reviews. And I was writing, 3 or 4 reviews a week, which meant reading 3 or 4 books a week. And it just started there. And I love reading. I've been a reader since I've been a child. And it just sparked in me a ferocious desire to write, because I would read something and I think maybe I could do that someday. But I've written for many, many years. I didn't have a book published until 1999. And by then I'd written lots of articles, mainly for single moms. My 2 closest friends were single moms. Suddenly they had went through divorces that they did not want. So I was telling their stories and ended up writing 4 books on behalf of single moms, even though I'm not a single mom. So that's how I got into the book writing.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Well, listen, I know you've written so many books, and we're going to talk about a few of them, but I really want to jump in before this question here and talk about your newest book called Finding Freedom and Joy in Self-Forgetfulness. What an interesting title. And then I got into the first few chapters of it in an interesting way of looking at life and looking at yourself when we live in this world where it's all about me, 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 and I need to analyze myself. So I'd really love for you to expound on why you wanted to write this book and how it can help us.
Well, I started writing this book during COVID when it was still the lockdown, I believe. And all of us were upended by that. I mean, by this pandemic, and it changed all of our lives. But I found myself watching the news, or listening to broadcasts, reading articles, and becoming day by day more and more overwhelmed with the uncertainty of what was happening in our world. And my husband challenged me to just get offline for a while and get back to, he called it faith basics. And it was the best advice I got during that time, because like all of us, you want to control outcomes, but only God is in control. And I found myself anxious, worried, afraid, and just uncertain about everything. Like, what is our life going to look like when all this is over, if it's ever over? So I started staying offline more, really spending more time reading the Bible, praying, even grabbing specific verses and just carrying with me through the day that reminded me of God's sovereignty and his goodness and his faithfulness and his great love for all of us. And I started to calm down. And I thought, wow, now I feel like I am in a place where I'm really confident that the Lord will meet my needs, whatever that looks like, so I can go out and meet other people's needs. So that's the whole term of self-forgetfulness, is that when we are confident because of what God tells us in his word, that he will meet all our needs, we are then free to go out and meet other people's needs generously, extravagantly, daily. And I think that's where this book was birthed. It was a very personal need in my own life. And that whole time, a couple of years ago, really revealed to me real weak areas in my faith and how I wanted to be in control, which I think we all want to be in control. But, that's an area where it is only God is in control, and we need to trust him and, grow our faith through these hard times. So that's how the book got started.
Oh, I love that, because it's something that we all we resonate with, and we can get so caught up in ourselves, and we have to focus on the fact that we don't have the answers. So why don't we go to the one who does? It's a wonderful.
And it's interesting as you were talking about this, ladies, because God is always weaving a story, isn't it? Through what we think is an obstacle, we have to go around it. And in the midst of that, we have a whole fresh encounter. Some of the people that have really gone through some challenging times are single moms, and you've written on that issue. Talk to us about that and some of the things you've discovered on parenting and women's health issues. I'd love for you to expand on those things. And then especially how you're discovering how the Lord enriches your work.
Yeah, it was like I said, in 1999, my first book was published, and it was called Going It Alone. And it was based on my two closest friends who went through unwanted divorces. Their husbands abandoned them and their young children, respectively. And so then we would talk every night, right? And they were in distress, of course. Their whole world was upended. But I started writing articles like once a month, because they would face a challenge. They would talk to me about how they worked through the challenge, how God, faithfully met their needs when it didn't look like there was any way to get out of impossible situations, whether it was health or finances or child custody, anything that goes along with that. But I watched them grow, and just their faith just blossomed, and their lives changed for the better. And now, many, many, many years later, they can look back and say, God met every need I had. And their children are all doing wonderfully. But at the time, of course, it was so hard. It was like a death. But I watched them, and I thought, oh, I've got to tell their story. So I became their advocate. And then I would write about their recent experiences, what they did right, what they did wrong, and how God met them at their point of need. And that was actually my first book. And then 3 more came along. But I will tell you, in my whole writing career, it's like God takes me from one topic to another, wherever I'm at currently in my life. So people say, well, how do you get the idea for a new book? And I say, well, it's because I'm so needy. I start going, I need this. I need this. And the Lord starts working in my heart. And then I start researching, reading, talking to lots of people, interviewing them. Most of my books are stories about real people in real life situations and how they take whatever particular topic I'm writing about and they make it their own. Because they always want to highlight that God is faithful.
Yes. Well, listen, let's hold that thought, and we're going to come right back and talk more about your work. We'll be right back after this short break.
John Tesh with you with now more reasons to spend time in nature, or even better, to live near a forest or a tree-filled park. Here are two. First, it reduces stress and it boosts your brain power. So researchers in Germany found that living within sight of trees strengthens the area of the brain that processes emotions like fear and anxiety, which makes people better at coping with stress. In fact, listen to this. Spending time in natural settings cuts the risk of an early death by a full 16 to 18%. Why are trees so beneficial? It's partly because we humans find green calming, since it's the color of spring and renewal. Plus, green is in the middle of the light spectrum. So just looking at the color creates a natural balancing effect on the body and brain. So what if there aren't any trees in your neighborhood? The good news is researchers say just looking at photographs or videos of forests will reduce stress in your world.
We're back with a prolific author, Michele Howe. Michele, you've written books and articles for every stage of life, as we mentioned, except your stage in our last segment. We spoke about things we face in our younger years. So let's talk about your work about staying afloat during life's toughest times. An empty nest. What's next? Love this line. Parenting about adult children without losing your mind. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that we recently, not too recently, are now empty nesters because sometimes your kids move back in, right? But in fact, our daughter is actually getting married next week, so it's
congratulations!
Yeah, that's very exciting. But a lot of that book was about our youngest daughter, Corinne, and the trials that she actually placed herself into. And I've told her story everywhere, and she is happy for everyone to know it because God really rescued her out of a life of danger and just drinking and drugs and just wild living for about 5 or 6 years, and really put our family through a lot. And she has a wonderful testimony of how God took her to the bottom and brought her back up, and she's doing so well now. But that book starts out with that story, because during that time, I will say, my husband and I often felt like we were losing our minds. Yeah. Not just her, but just there's so many scenarios in the empty nest season. And, it changes, and people sometimes grieve right away, and then other parents will grieve later on. But, you can't really think that there's a formula because we're all unique individuals. And I didn't really grieve the empty nest until my son left, and he was our youngest, but the other three, they kind of just swooped out. Both of them, older girls, got married. Corinne was here for a bit in trouble, but we were really trying to work with her, and then she left. But some people will say, I didn't cry when they left. Well, I cried when we dropped our son off at college, and then dried my tears and came home, because not that I was sad that he was leaving, because I realized it was closing a chapter on our life.
Exactly.
And we were going to have to reboot, to say it a different way, with my husband and I, because, when you have 4 kids, you're busy with them. So we had to do some marriage changes, and really be more intentional about spending time together, finding things again that we really like to do with each other. And we served together. And that was my husband's idea. I said, I can have my own, service opportunities, and he has his own. He's a teacher and a coach. However, we weren't doing anything together. And he said, we need to do something together. And when I go back to that book, I always suggest to couples that try to find a place where you can serve your community, your church, your family, your friends, neighbors, something together, because it bonds you in a different way. I mean, most of your life is spent rearing your children, and then maybe into the grandparent stage, which is where we are delightfully at now. But it was a time of transition, and I don't think people always think that it's going to be hard, but I think it is hard. And sometimes you get into the middle of it and you're like, wow, this doesn't feel normal anymore. And you have to really work through new challenges and just a new season of life.
Michele, one of the things that you've also been involved with is your work with Focus on the Family. And I know they have many specific areas that they delve into related to family and emotional health and well-being, and helping people on their spiritual journey. I'm curious as to the areas that they wanted you to be invested in. Could you unpack that just a little bit for my nosy mind.
Yeah. Well, the first time I was on Focus on the Family was for Empty Nest, What's Next? Because they really want to talk about that. And that was a great visit. They're terrific people. They're so welcoming. You go in the morning and they're like family. They treat you like, just like, oh, you're one of us. And they're delightful. The next time I visited, we did 2 different interviews, and it was caring for your aging parents. Now, my parents are older, but the stories I tell in that book were about our caregiving experiences of our elderly neighbor first, and then my husband's dad, and how the first time we failed miserably because we did not know what we were doing. It was so stressful. And then 4 years later, when my husband's father had esophageal cancer and only 5 months to live, we did it differently, but it was one of the richest seasons of our life because we knew what we were doing. So I tell a lot of stories about that, and they were interested in that, of course. And then we also did one on grandparenting. And that's, again, one of my favorite topics, but I really want grandparents to be intentional. I mean, we only have so much time, so many people we can be invested in per person. And, grandkids, be they live far away or close to you, they're spiritual charges. I mean, we want to lead them into a relationship with Christ. We want to demonstrate unconditional love. And especially now when the family unit is so changing and unstable, grandparents have such an opportunity to come in and help moms and dads.
Well, that's what I was thinking. We've been talking a lot about mentorship lately and how important it is for a community. But being a grandparent is being the ultimate mentor to your grandchild. I mean, the importance of that. You must see that in your writings and in your environment, that how needed it is today in our culture, right?
Right. And, many, many grandparents are now raising their children too. And I have good friends who were raising their grandchildren because their adult children were unable to for various reasons. But it's completely different than it was 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
And I agree. And parents today often are so busy and they're so tired and they're so weary. And our world is just changing at light speed. So to have a grandma or a grandpa or both be able to take the kids for a few hours or write letters to them and put an encouraging few sentences, affirming them, loving them. I think we all know, if we've been parents, that sometimes your grandchildren will accept things from you, truth from you, encouragement from you, even maybe a little bit of a rebuke from you that they might not accept from their parents.
That's true.
It's a good word. It's a good word. I think one of the biggest challenges, of course, as you're aware, is the huge epidemic of loneliness that people are going through, and especially with the senior population. I shared it on a show about a week ago where my wife, she visits a lot of seniors, and she went in and one dear person just broke down in tears because she said, I have no one who ever comes to visit. Wow. And that is just the reality of loneliness. You've written on so many things. It seems that as you're going through seasons, that becomes the fertile soil to birth all these books. What's next? What do you see coming next?
Well, I am just finishing a new book called The Humble Life, and it's journeying along with Jesus through the Gospels. And it's just a study of everything he shared throughout the Gospels and how he dealt with people with compassion and tenderness and care and humility, even with those who opposed him, brutally opposed him, and hated him and had enemies. So I'm taking 20 chapters to unpack that. And boy, if I learned a lot. It's been a blessing to me. And also a challenge to me because I thought I was a lot more humble than I was. I mean, I don't think I'm prideful at all. But when you start looking at what Jesus did and you compare it, I go, oh, you have so far to go, woman. So that's my next book that's coming out, and I'm excited about it.
Well, I love how honest and open you are about your own journey. And obviously, that's why God has blessed you with the ability to write and share it with the rest of us that also need it. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for the blessing of your books. And I'm sure God's going to bless you with a lot more.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great part of my day. Thank you.
I'm glad you could be with us.
All right, stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back.
this extraordinary ripple effect that we see how this gift has not only transformed the person's life who got the chair, but the family members, the caregivers, the whole community. Maybe now the mother can go and get a job because she doesn't need to stay home and take care of her child all day. Right now, more than ever, those living with disabilities in developing countries urgently need our support. With your help, we can change lives, one person at a time. Together, we can provide the transforming gift of mobility. Together, we can make this world a better place.
Well, just like that spot and just like Michelle, I was thinking that, we may feel like, well, what can I do? Life happens, but that's the whole point. Life is happening every day around us. And in that, we can learn lessons, and we have the ability to always share them or to help in some way. Just like she is using her own life experience to allow God to work in her and then write about it so that we can also glean the wisdom that she has learned through her life experiences. And she's got over 20 books because of that, and Focus on the Family's used her for that. And I think it's just a reminder that we need to not underestimate our own personal experiences that we go through so that we can use them to benefit those around us.
So here's my read on it today. A lot of times it's like we're driving down the road and we come to a stoplight. And the red light can be caused by many different things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bad experience, or we keep talking about COVID, and that's still a reality for many people, the ramifications, or it can be a bad decision, a financial crisis, and the list is endless.
Right.
But many people stay at the stoplight.
Yes.
And I just want to encourage you today to look at the light a little differently. Look for the green. And I want to encourage you to get up and to get going. Matter of fact, Jesus called us to go into all the world and preach the gospel. It's really easy to be stalled out and to say, I can't do anything. I can't make a difference. Michelle gives us an example of someone who is choosing to make a difference. Julie has already referenced it. I want to invite you on this amazing journey to get past the red light. The light has turned green. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to come back and teach the final part from the book of James, chapter 1 this week, on how to get going when the light turns green. So stay with us. We're going to be right back, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay, fasten your seatbelts. I got some things I got to share with you as we wrap up the final part of James chapter 1. We've been talking about navigating the bumps in the road, okay? It is easy to get parked at the red light. And we get parked at the red light when we ask the question, why? Folks, there's nothing wrong with asking God, why this or why that? But it's time to start asking another question. And maybe the question is for you today, as it is for me, Lord, what's next? Okay, we're here. I might not like the situation, but we're here. What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? And when you say, why me? Well, why not? God tells us in his word that he allows difficult things to happen to us, not to beat us down, but so that we will look to him to find strength. And in the midst of those trials, the easiest thing is to give in to temptation. And the temptation says that God's not loving, he's not fair, he's not there with me. And it's very easy to go down that negative path. It's also very easy to compromise our walk with Jesus by giving in to temptation. Now, James is going to talk about these things because they are like the huge potholes. Sometimes they are like craters, and they will just destroy your life if you let them. You have a choice. You don't have to let them. And we find the strength comes out of God's word as we look to his word and as we seek to follow him. So if you're going to navigate the bumps in the road, all right, you need a divine perspective. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you got to find your perspective by looking at the cross. Said that yesterday, that Jesus, it says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. How do you have joy when you're going to the cross? Because he was in the center of his Father's will. And perhaps the Father's will is for you to be going through what you're going through right now. Do you pray for deliverance? Absolutely. When I was sick, did I pray that I'd get well? Absolutely. When people come to me, I pray for them. And sometimes God answers my prayers right now. Sometimes they're answered in the future. But I want to encourage you to stop asking the question why. I can ask it a few times, but let's move on. Let's leave the red lights behind. And you see, God is teaching us that through trials, he can be trusted. In James 1:13, we read these words, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one." But guess what? We are tempted to go astray, and this can be just about with anything. Matter of fact, it is with everything. And by that, I'm saying the temptation is to turn our back on God. The temptation can be to give in to sin, to lust, to say, I'm not happy with my partner. I'm going to go find someone else. The grass has got to be greener on the other side of the fence. Well, folks, if the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, it's probably because the guy has to pay a higher water bill. It's as simple as that. But here we read, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own evil desire. You see, evil desire is a strong desire directed towards an object. It's lust. It's not love. You say, oh, I just got to have it right now. Well, that's not love. That's not the loving way. That's lusting after something. And then it says, we are dragged away. Kind of comical when you think about it. It's the idea of putting bait on a hook. And I've said this before, even in our church family. I'll never understand what a fish sees as being attractive about a worm. But that's like sin. It paints itself up so good and it tempts us. And it tempts us by promising us something that we can get that will ultimately destroy us. And then it says that we get enticed and we're caught and we're trapped. We've been drawn in and we feel just awful. Folks, the good news is that God is not interested in seeing you and I falter. He wants us to overcome. And we read that in verse 16. He says, don't be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above. God wants to give you his gifts, his goodness. And oftentimes his gift is the experience of his presence in the midst of a challenging moment. Could that be you today? Probably it is. And maybe that's why God has allowed you to tune into our broadcast today, to listen to this program, so that you'll understand that God wants you to be an overcomer. We think of the analogy of going on a trip, the family trip, the road trip. Well, you know what? Going on a road trip means I need to be prepared. I got to be prepared in my mind. I need God's perspective as I look at things, realizing that even though it's tough, he is going to be with me. But I need to be praying specifically. I need to be praying that I will stay in the center of God's will. I need to be praying and saying, Lord, give me strength to say no to the things that are wrong and to say yes to you and to trust you. Even when the question why is banging in my brain, I know this, that if God is for me, who can be against me? And he loves you. He cares for you. And through him, you can be more than a conqueror.